Welcome to part 3 of our lecture on psychological aspects of consumerism. So in this final part, we're going to talk about consumer involvements. Read up on this, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to give you a quick summary. The decision-making process does vary depending on how involved the consumer is and how involved the decision needs to be. If it's routine, if it's something you buy all the time, it's considered low risk. It doesn't require you to research. Let's say you run out of white socks. You're not going to sit there and start comparing. Let's compare Gold Toe with Hanes and Fruit of the Loom, and you're going to spend hours and hours just comparing and the price point and which one has a reinforced toe. You're not going to do that. You're going to go to your kind of go-to brand. You pick, or the first ones you find, and you're done. So that is routine. So it has very low level of involvement. Limited is when maybe it's an unfamiliar brand or unfamiliar product category. You can do just a quick little search, maybe look at how many stars it has for reviews, let's say on Amazon, and then you spend a little bit of time, but not a whole lot. Extensive is when you're buying something that's much more expensive, very infrequent, or you've never purchased a big ticket item, a car, a house, an appliance, a wedding dress, something that you want specific results, but you don't typically buy all the time, and it requires a lot of research. So this is just a quick little table so you can see the involvement, time, cost for routine, limited, and extensive. So you can see involvement is short. For routine, short, the time is low, cost is short, information search is typically internal, and number of alternatives typically 1. Limited, low to moderate, short to moderate, low to moderate on cost, mostly internal, and a few alternatives. Now extensive, this is where you get a little bit of variety, but typically very high involvement, long time, high cost. Those are very common. Information search is typically internal, external, and number of alternatives. This is where it varies. It could be that you don't have that many alternatives to begin with, or you might have 3 or 4 or a lot, but you typically spend a lot of time researching and putting information to find out. So your purchase decision is the act of the consumer buying the product that you most prefer or that you can get with the sources that you have. So the 2 factors is the attitude of others and unexpected situational factors that can get in between the intentions and the actual decision. So other people might dissuade you from buying it, or unexpected factors like, you didn't have as much money, for example, or it's out of stock and then it forces you to get something else. That happens. Sometimes it's back ordered. It's not going to be delivered in enough time, things like that. So post-purchase behavior, I checked Postpurchase dissonance is common because satisfaction is important. And the questions that you ask yourself, did I make a good decision? Did I buy the right product? Did I get a good value? And no matter what income bracket, consumer behavior is very common when it comes to value. Like, did you get a good value? Like the most bang for your buck. Now, some people are value oriented. They only want low cost, low price. Even those that have more money, they want to make sure they're happy with their purchase. Consumers that are happy, they give good word of mouth. They praise the product. They're happy. They show it off. Now, studies show some studies vary, but it shows on average that unhappy customers tell on average of about 11 other people of their unhappy experience. And now we have social media so that you can show how unhappy you are with certain something, especially if you're mad. And you have Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and everything else to really kind of showcase I'm not happy with this. Managerial implications. Let me go back. Sorry. Things like warranties, follow-up sales, guarantees, things like that. Because if you overpromise, you underdeliver, you have a very unhappy customer. So think about what happens after they make the purchase. Don't just, trick them into buying it. What happens afterwards? So as a company, you have to think about that. Post-purchase behavior. Are they going to be happy so that they praise you versus unhappy and speak badly of you and your brand? Talked about cognitive dissonance. These are inconsistencies, beliefs, attitudes, and actions. How intense it is going to vary. It's not the same across the board, but the idea is that if you had an expected level of quality, or you had these expectations and they're not met, there's inconsistencies, you have cognitive dissonance and you're not happy. So what happens is you want to reduce the dissonance, right? Because when it's increased dissonance and you have all this inconsistency, you had people not happy. There's different things you can do to increase or decrease dissonance. Sometimes there is a conflict, and as a consumer, you ignore it because you're like, I just need it. I need to get this now. Sometimes you have to change your belief, maybe change the behavior, how you purchase something. And other times, by making some changes, you increase dissonance. You have a higher expectation all of a sudden. There's different things that as a consumer, example, I smoke cigarettes and I know smoking is unhealthy. So you can either say, okay, I'm going to stop smoking, and then get Nicorette packs, chewing gum, to try to stop. I don't know, maybe switch to vaping and then switch to stopping. You have some options there. Or you could say, well, smoking's not that bad. I think they're exaggerating on the bad, and you just keep buying your cigarettes. Or you can say, yes, smoking is bad, but I do other good things, so I'll be fine. Or I know what, I don't care how bad it is. I know it's bad. We all have to die sometime, and you just keep buying the same cigarette. There's different ways of approaching that same situation, and you'll buy certain things depending on how you view the situation. So that post-purchase dissonance, the probability that and how intense that dissonance is will vary. It really varies on the degree of commitment, whether the decision can be revoked. In other words, can you return the product? Is it a permanent thing? How much money you spent on it? How important that decision was to the consumer, because certain decisions are more important than others. How much effort and difficulty the consumer had in basing, when they were weighing out the alternatives. And also, it's interesting, but it's true. Individuals tendency to deal with struggles or experience anxiety because they could be like, oh no, I just spent this money and this is not what I want and I'm not happy with it, and they really stress out. They get really angry. Some people are notorious for just returning everything. Other people like, I don't care, I'm not happy with it, but it was my own fault. I learn from it and I'll make a better decision next time. So it really does depend on also how you experience anxiety and how you deal with that. So post-purchase dissonance, to reduce it, there are certain things that you can do. So as a company, you can increase how desirable the brand is. So a really cool image and make it sought after will reduce the dissonance, right? Because just upon purchasing the brand, people tend to be very happy with it. Increasing the status of the brand helps. And status doesn't mean necessarily high end. It just means it's sought after, it's cool, it's hip. Decrease the desirability of the rejected alternative. So make the other options not look as good. Really showcase that your option is the best so that they realize they made a good purchase. Decrease the importance of the purchase decision. Make it seem like it's not a big deal. You're going to get what you want to get out of the purchase anyways. You can also reverse the purchase decision. You can allow for returns, and that is something that's important. You have to find a balance as a company when you do your return policy. If your return policy is too strict, you can't return it unless you have your circled, highlighted, stamped receipt, and it's only within the last 24 hours or all sales are final, you're going to dissuade some people from buying your stuff. Now, if your return policy is too liberal, it's a problem because if anyone can return anything, people will take advantage. That means you have to drive up your price points. Everyone pays for that. You have to find a balance of make it so it's fair that they really do return it because they're unhappy with the purchase, and then figure out why they're unhappy so that you can fix it. So asking nicely, not in an intimidating way, but say, was the product not meeting your satisfaction? Because sometimes it's, I bought the wrong size, I just made the wrong decision, and other times I wanted this, but it's defective or I'm not happy with it. Find out why they're not happy with it, because you're not going to figure out how to fix the problem unless you find out what the problem is. So that's something that as a company, return policy, as a consumer, you can return the product. Make sure you follow the instructions, the policy of the store, or live with your choice and future no and say like, I tend to be like this. I'm like, you know what? I don't have time to sit there and stand there in the return line. I see people do that and I can't do it. Unless it's really like a big deal, well, I made the mistake. I won't make that mistake again. I'll make the mistake once, not twice. I just don't want to deal with it. But other people will return things that even shouldn't be returned in there. Innovations. Bell curve for trends and items that come into the market. Just know that early market is those that are innovators and early adopters, and these are the percentages. So these are people that are willing to spend more money. These are celebrities, very wealthy people, influencers, and they want to be early on the trend, whatever it is, whether it's clothes, makeup, electronics. There's this chasm because the majority of the people hit early and late majority. So this is where the mass, the population, this is where the item, everyone starts having access to it. And laggards are people that really just wanted clearance off, the rack off, Ross, or at a, yard sale or whatever. But most of the people kind of hit the middle of that curve. That's why it's like a bell shape. So just realize that if you want it early, you have to pay for it. There's less quantity, it's more expensive. Things are mass produced when it's available to the public, and it makes it more accessible, more affordable, but also not as cool, right? Because everyone has it. So this is a general trend for early adopters. They tend to be highly educated. They tend to have a high literacy rate. They tend to show some intelligence, achievement, definitely a lot of aspirations. I'm not saying they're guaranteed this. They definitely have high aspirations. They tend to have a high socioeconomic status because it's very expensive to get things early on, and they're really big on prestige, social mobility, upward social mobility, higher income. In terms of flexibility, abstract, and greater empathy, I'm not sure about that, but they're willing to take risks. They're not waiting for the safety of everyone else has it to use something or wear something. So definitely more social participation. They tend to live in cosmopolitan areas. Definitely huge on mass media exposure, opinion leadership. So you can see this table on the innovators, early adapters, early majority, late majority. So read up on their characteristics, because it's, as a company, you have to know where your product lands and where your customer is. Is your customer an early adopter, early majority? Because that's going to depend on when you're really going to introduce your product and how they're going to respond. So that's important as a company. And just realize, just like an example, like the first iPhone launched in 2007 and it cost $600. Early adopters, because a $600 phone back then was like, oh my gosh, that's super expensive. It's not now in today's standards, but it was back then. And then 2 months later, Apple lowered the price to $400. 2 months later, they lowered it by $200. And then in 2009, the price fell again to $200, and the phone offered twice the storage. So see, now more people are getting it because it's available to the masses. So that's a great example. In terms of emotions, just know advertising, we'll talk about in the advertising section. They really try to hit the emotional response because that has more influence when it hits like an emotional chord with you. So we're going to be talking about that because for ads, whether it's on print, whether it's on television, or the stuff you see in social media, actual advertisements, they really do want to strike an emotional chord. And we'll talk about that because that's even more so than ever before. And studies show that positive emotions towards a brand have greater influence on a consumer loyalty than trust and other judgment. So a positive emotion is higher loyalty than trust and other judgments. Although this is increasing, the trust and other judgments part in today's climate is increasing. We're going to talk about that because that's right now as we speak developing. So we need to talk about that because if you look at our ads, there's a big shift that we're seeing in our advertisements today. Shopping values, last couple of things, utilitarian versus hedonic. So utilitarian is about actual need and function, and hedonic is more for fun and entertainment and just some of your customers, you might be more utilitarian and you might be more hedonic or a combination of both. And as a company, you need to know where your typical customer lies. Is it more utilitarian or hedonic? So utilitarian, you want to really stress value. Price point is really important. Whereas hedonic is more, it's fun, it's colorful, it's fun to show off, things like that. So very important, those two terms, and you need to know it because it will be in your quiz. Is it more on need and function versus something that you don't necessarily need? So this gives you a little example, things that are more fun and just for pure entertainment purposes. And I'm not here to tell you one's better than the other. It just depends on your situation. And sometimes it could be a combination of both. Sometimes you need just strict utilitarian purchases and then others are more hedonic. So it just depends. But these are some examples. So staying with current trends, social shopping, gratification to make you happy because you're having a bad day. Those are all hedonic. Whereas like I need it for food, I need to pay the rent, I need to fix this because it's going to flood the house. That's all utilitarian. Now, utilitarian shopping may be necessary, but not always sufficient to build store loyalties. It might be that you need it, but you're not necessarily loyal to that brand. So hedonic value represents a little bit more of an emotional worth. Again, they tend to be a little bit more loyal that way. But if another brand comes up that's really cooler and it satisfies that, then people can switch off, no problem. Especially younger. The younger the consumer, the more fickle they are, and they tend to be able to switch off. And lastly, conspicuous consumption. So again, possession of valuable objects that have long been an outward sign of authority and prestige and social class. And it's important for people because there is a distinction between luxury and necessity. And it does depend where geographically you are. In certain places like a refrigerator, a vacuum cleaner, that's considered a necessity here in the United States. And in other places, that's a luxury. I know some people here that think, a dishwasher is a necessity. Like, I can't live without a dishwasher. And then they move to Europe and they're like, why? Or South America, and they're like, why isn't there a dishwasher? And they're like, that's not... You got to be realistic. We don't use that here. You use your hands. And people are like, oh my gosh, how's that possible? So it depends on what you are. So sometimes what we view as necessity versus luxury can fluctuate. Some people think, oh, it's obvious to everybody and it's the same everywhere. It is not. It changes. It varies. And today's consumer, again, you have so much variety here, detergents and soaps. So even soap, you need soap to wash yourself, but you can buy the luxury oil of Olay body soap that has hyaluronic acid, and that's $11. It's soap, so are you going to consider that a necessity? Or is it a luxury? Because you can get a much more inexpensive soap to clean yourself, right? To clean your body or wash your hands. It's that blurring the line of what's necessity and what's a need and what's a want, what's a need and a luxury, what's practical and utilitarian versus hedonic. It gets grayed and blurry there. So again, we're going to keep talking about this throughout the entire term because that is a common issue of blurring that line. So thank you so much for listening.